Josh Sweat could be one step away from signing with the Chicago Bears. And in a minute, I'm going to tell you why this trade might be Ryan Poles' biggest gamble yet. Bleacher Report dropped the bomb. A 3-team trade that brings in the $76 million pass rusher from Arizona and ships Cole Kmet out of Hollis Hall right when Caleb Williams needs more defensive pressure than ever to compete in the NFC North. But while Chicago's working the trade market, the stadium saga just blew up in Indiana. Drilling crews showed up on a new site near Wolf Lake. An entire county is refusing to foot the bill, and a rival mayor is out here calling it a toxic zone. And you need to hear why this could stall the whole Hammond project before it even breaks ground. And to wrap it up, ESPN's Ben Solak put Luther Burden III on a list right next to Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, a stat nobody in the Windy City saw coming, one that could completely flip who's the real OR1 for the Bears in 2026. Bear down, fam, because this one's about to get good. Okay, this is exactly the kind of rumor that gets me writing a script at 1 in the morning. On Wednesday, June 24th, Christopher Knox of Bleacher Report floated a 3-team trade proposal, the Chicago Bears land pass. Rusher Josh Sweat from Arizona, the Carolina Panthers get tight end, Cole Kmet from Chicago, and the Cardinals collect 2 fourth-round picks in the 2027 draft, one from the Bears and one from the Panthers. Let's break this down piece by piece because there are layers here people are skipping right past. First, who is Josh Sweat and why should you care? This guy signed a 4-year, $76.4 million contract with Arizona in free agency, fresh off winning a Super Bowl in Philadelphia. In 2025, his first season with the Cardinals, he had the best year of his career. 12 sacks, 13 tackles for loss, 17 quarterback hits, and 4 forced fumbles. 29 years old at his physical peak, producing like never before, and yet he didn't show up for the start of OTAs this May. That set off alarm bells immediately. Why would a guy coming off the best season of his career skip voluntary practices? Because the Cardinals are, right now, an organizational mess. They finished 2025 with a record of 3 wins and 14 losses. They fired head coach Jonathan Gannon in January, the same coach Sweat had reunited with when he signed in Arizona, since Gannon had been his defensive coordinator in Philadelphia. So Sweat partly signed with Arizona because of that relationship with the coaching staff, and 4 months later the team fired the guy. And here's the detail almost nobody is treating with the weight it deserves. Sweat has 0 guaranteed money remaining beyond this season. He's in year 2 of a 4-year deal with no real financial security, playing for an organization that just proved it has neither patience nor direction. If I were Josh Sweat, I wouldn't be too eager to show up for voluntary OTAs in that environment either. Now, on Chicago's side, do the Bears need a pass rusher of this caliber? No sugarcoating it. Yes, urgently. Chicago's defense finished near the bottom of the league in quick pressures and pass rush win rate last season. And here's the uncomfortable part you need to hear. That same defense led the league in takeaways and turnover differential in 2025. Statistically speaking, that's exactly the kind of production that tends to regress toward the mean the following year. I'm not saying the Bears' defense is about to collapse, but any honest analyst has to admit they leaned heavily on turnover luck. And the best way to insulate yourself from that regression is to build a pass rush that generates consistent pressure, not one that depends on the other team making mistakes. Chicago does have young pieces on the edge. Austin Booker, who missed 7 games last year with a preseason injury, is set to start opposite Montez Sweat. Dayo Odiengbo, coming back from an Achilles injury, and Shamar Turner, last year's second-round pick recovering from a torn ACL, could both be ready for Week 1. But could be ready isn't a plan, fam. It's a hope. And teams that win Super Bowls don't build their pass rush on medical recovery timelines. Now let's talk about Cole Kmet, because this is where most of the public analysis is falling short. The easy narrative is the Bears drafted Colston Loveland 10th overall last year, then drafted Sam Roush at pick 69 this year, so obviously Kmet is expendable. And yes, that depth chart logic is real. But listen closely, because there's a number that completely changes the financial math on this trade. A number almost nobody's putting on the table with the clarity it deserves. Back in April, before the draft, the Bears restructured Kmet's contract. They converted $7.65 million of his salary into a bonus, which dropped his 2026 cap hit from $11.6 million down to $7.775 million. The cost of that move? His 2027 cap hit, the final year of his deal, jumped up to $15.425 million. And here's the number that actually matters. If the Bears trade or cut Kmet this year, according to Over the Cap's numbers, they would only save $2.35 million, while eating $5.42 million in dead cap, spread across the next 2 years. Read that again. $2.5 million in real savings, that's nothing. That is not freeing up cap space to sign an elite edge rusher. That's basically playing with pocket change. So why would Ryan Poles make this trade? Not for the 2026 money, because we just established the 2026 money barely moves the needle. He'd do it for the role and for 2027. Kmet is no longer a passing game starter. In 2025, he finished with just 30 catches and 347 yards, his lowest number since his rookie year, while Loveland, in his own rookie season, led the entire team with 58 catches, 713 yards, and 6 touchdowns, becoming the first rookie tight end to lead the Bears in receptions since Mike Ditka back in 1961. That's not a small detail, fam. That's franchise history. And on top of that, they drafted RUSHER, a 6'6" blocker who's going to eat into the heavy personnel snaps that used to belong to Kmet. Poles was direct about this in his post-draft press conference. He said his feelings toward Cole haven't changed, that the Bears remain a top 5 team in the league in 12 and 13 personnel usage, and that nothing changes for him. But let's be honest. That's what any general manager says publicly about a player they end up trading later. I'm not saying Poles is lying. I'm saying that in the NFL, our feelings haven't changed, and we're trading him in October are not mutually exclusive sentences. My honest take on this specific proposal: as it's structured, it's a little light for Chicago if you're looking at pure market value. Josh Sweat, coming off 12 regular season sacks with guaranteed money running out after this year, is worth more than a reduced role tight end, plus a free 4th-round pick tossed to Arizona. If I were Poles, I'd push for Arizona to eat part of the contract, or for the pick coming out of Chicago to be a 5th-rounder, not a 4th. That said, and this feels like the important part, the real winner of this trade, if it happens, is Carolina, not Arizona. The Panthers haven't had a tight end break 500 receiving yards in a season since Greg Olsen back in 2019. Last year, all 3 Carolina tight ends combined for just 610 yards. Kmet, who put up 73 catches and 719 yards in his best season back in 2023, would immediately fix the most obvious hole in that offense. Is this trade happening in July? My prediction, and I want to be clear, this is a prediction, not a confirmed fact. No. I think this moves closer to the October trade deadline if Sweat remains unhappy in Arizona, and the Cardinals accept that they need to sell assets before losing all the value on a contract with no guarantees left. By then, we'll also know whether Loveland confirms his ascent, and whether Rush is actually taking snaps away from Kmet in blocking packages. If that happens, the case for trading Kmet gets a lot easier to make internally, even if the real cap savings stay minimal this year. Fam, we already know how the first half of this story ends. Illinois had its shot. Springfield's legislature couldn't pass the fiscal mechanism the Bears needed to finance Arlington Heights, and the franchise's board formally voted to move forward with plans in Hammond, Indiana. We closed that chapter weeks ago. What's happening now is the part nobody's telling you correctly. Even in Indiana, things aren't fully settled. Let's start with the most recent development. This past weekend, drilling equipment showed up again in Hammond, this time on a new plot near Wolf Lake Terminals, west of Interstate 90, a different location from the original Wolf Lake Park site that had been the main focus up to this point. Team officials confirmed this is part of the normal evaluation process, as they continue advancing the project in Hammond. Translated into plain English, the Bears are still testing land. They still don't have a final site. They still don't have a construction timeline. And they've spent months telling everybody they already chose Indiana. I think it's important to say this bluntly. Choosing a region is not the same as choosing a plot of land, and choosing a plot of land is not the same as having the financing locked in. And that's where this story gets genuinely interesting, because Indiana's incentive package, approved by the legislature and signed by Governor Mike Braun in late February, depends on a mix of new local taxes in Lake and Porter counties, plus an undetermined share of a $700 million fund from the Indiana Toll Roads private operator. More than $1 billion total in public money earmarked for infrastructure around the stadium. And here's where the problem almost nobody is covering with the attention it deserves comes in. Porter County doesn't want to pay. County Commissioner Jim Biggs put it bluntly. He said he sees no appetite in his county to impose a 1% restaurant tax and send that money over to Lake County to finance a stadium that isn't even being built on their land. He said, and I'm translating his idea faithfully, that there's a negligible percentage of Porter County residents who'd support creating that tax and putting the money in an envelope to mail off to Hammond. That quote feels brutally honest to me, and I think it captures exactly the tension that's going to define the next several months of this negotiation. Now, is this an existential crisis for the project? Honestly, I don't think it is, and this is where I disagree a bit with the panic I've seen from some fans online. The Porter County tax represents, according to the legislative analysis of the bill that authorized the package, less than 10% of the roughly $60 million projected annually in stadium-related tax revenue. It's not the piece holding up the whole financial structure. Governor Braun, when asked about Porter's resistance, said it doesn't trouble him and that he expects most people to come around once the project gets closer to the finish line. Hammond Mayor Thomas McDermott was even more direct. He said there are people in Porter County who are going to work at the Bears Stadium, and that 10 years from now, when Caleb Williams is possibly living in that area, people are going to feel differently about it. But there's another layer of friction that I think is genuinely more serious, and it's about the land itself. Arlington Heights Mayor Jim Tenaglia went public a few weeks back, warning about hazardous waste sites in Hammond. His general point, paraphrased faithfully, he's worked on enough sites with gas stations or dry cleaners to know that kind of material contaminates the ground, and he'd be very concerned about choosing a site like that. That statement, coming from the mayor of the city directly competing to keep the stadium, needs to be read with two layers in mind. First, it's legitimate technical information, because building on contaminated industrial soil really does carry environmental remediation costs that can be enormous and unpredictable. Second, it's coming from someone with a direct interest in Chicago choosing his city over Hammond, so it's not a neutral analysis. The Hammond mayor responded with a line I thought was smart. He said he understands people wanting to take a close look, but the Bears know far more about the environmental concerns in that area than any of us do, because they're spending millions of dollars evaluating it. And honestly, he's right about something. If the Bears are testing multiple different sites with drilling, soil analysis, remediation assessment, that's not because they're improvising. It's because they're being methodical about a real risk that exists in that industrial corridor. My personal read on this whole picture, Illinois already lost this fight, and I think we all knew that weeks ago. But the narrative that Indiana has it all figured out and it's just waiting on a signature is honestly more political marketing than reality. There are counties fighting each other over who pays what tax. There are legitimate unresolved environmental concerns, and the Bears are still hunting for new land in the middle of July. This is going to get resolved, yes, but it's not going to be as clean or as fast as some Indiana officials want you to believe. And for Chicago fans, the reality stays the same as it's been for weeks now. The zip code is probably changing, but the team, the history and the legacy are not. And to close, the part of the day that genuinely puts me in a good mood. ESPN's Ben Solak published a breakdown of second-year players with superstar potential, and he put Luther Burden III in that conversation with a stat that, honestly, had me sitting with it for a while. During the 2025 regular season, Burden averaged 2.92 yards per route run. That number is tied with A.J. Brown for the best mark by a rookie receiver, with a minimum of 50 targets over the past 15 years. Just below that mark sit names like Justin Jefferson, Odell Beckham Jr., Puka Nacua, and Jamar Chase. Listen closely. That is not just any company. Nearly every one of those receivers went on to become their team's undisputed number one option. Now, let's be fair with the context. Burden didn't have the volume of targets those other names had in their rookie years. He finished the season with 47 catches, 652 yards, and 2 touchdowns, starting only 5 games. That means his efficiency per opportunity was elite, but we still don't know how that efficiency holds up once the volume spikes. And Solak was honest in his report, warning that Loveland, not Burden, might end up being Caleb Williams' primary target in 2026. That's an important nuance worth respecting, not ignoring just because the yards per route number sounds spectacular. But there's more context reinforcing the idea that Burden's rise is real, not just off-season hype. With DJ Moore gone to Buffalo, 85 targets from last year are now up for grabs. And through OTAs, Burden has stayed completely healthy, something he couldn't say last year when he played through a quad injury down the stretch. His teammate Colston Loveland described him with a line that felt genuine, not rehearsed. He called Burden the truth, man, nothing but the truth, praising his work ethic and attitude. When a teammate talks like that about another player in the middle of June with no ESPN cameras around, there's usually something real behind it. And here's the contrast that makes this story even more interesting. Rome Odunze, the 9th overall pick in the 2024 draft, had a much rockier 2025. He started hot, but battled a foot stress fracture through the second half of the season, finished with 44 catches, 661 yards, and 6 touchdowns, and dropped a perfectly thrown touchdown pass from Caleb Williams in the divisional round against the Rams, a play that cost Chicago 7 points in a game they ended up losing by just 3. That end zone drop became one of the defining images of the Bears' season, for better or worse. My honest opinion here, I don't think this is really a who's the true WR1 competition, because I think that question becomes irrelevant pretty fast if Ben Johnson designs the attack the right way. What I do believe is that Burden enters 2026 with more momentum, more health, and more institutional confidence than Odunze at this exact point on the calendar. That could change in August, but today, in July, the public conversation is right to lean toward Burden. Now, one last piece I want to bring in, because it feels relevant to this same receiver room. Tri-City Sports published an opinion column this week calling for the Bears to reach out to Keenan Allen, the 34-year-old free agent who played one season in Chicago back in 2024, catching 70 passes for 744 yards and 7 touchdowns, before returning to Los Angeles with the Chargers, where he posted 81 catches, 777 yards, and 4 touchdowns in 2025. I want to be clear with you. This is an opinion piece from that outlet, not a report that the Bears are actually pursuing Allen. There's no indication Chicago is making that call, but I understand the underlying argument. Khalif Raymond, the top veteran addition at receiver, hasn't cracked 300 yards in either of his last 2 seasons. Xavier Thomas, the third-round rookie, has made a good impression through the offseason program, but plenty of analysts viewed him as a reach at that point in the draft. And if Odensey or Burden get hurt, which already happened to both of them last year, the depth behind them doesn't inspire a ton of confidence. My take. I don't think the Bears desperately need Allen, but I also don't think it's crazy for them to make the call, even just to have the option on the table, on a team that's in a real contention window, passing on a productive veteran who already knows the system just because you feel comfortable with the current room is exactly the kind of overconfidence that ends up costing you in Week 14 when somebody gets hurt. That's everything for today, fam. And look, what I like most about today's slate is that even with the stadium giving us all headaches and even with the Kmet trade proposal still unresolved, this offense has real pieces to fight with on the field. Luther Burden is on a trajectory even the most optimistic projections didn't see coming a year ago. If Chicago solves that pass rush, with or without Josh Sweat, this defense stops depending on turnover luck and starts depending on real pressure. And Caleb Williams, with that room of weapons growing around him, still hasn't hit his ceiling. Bear down, always. If this video gave you something, drop the like, subscribe, and tell me down in the comments. Would you make this trade for Josh Sweat, even if it only costs a 4th-round pick? Or would you rather keep Kmet as insurance for the 12 personnel package? I want to read every single answer. See you in the next one.